The courtroom air was a stale cocktail of old paper, cheap disinfectant, and the faint metallic scent of fear. It clung to the dark wood of the pews and the scuffed linoleum floors, a permanent residue of 1,000 broken lives and shattered hope. Fluorescent lights hummed a monotonous, soul-crushing drone from recessed ceiling panels, casting a pale, sickly light that made everyone look guilty. Elias Vance sat at the defendant's table. He did not belong there, but his presence was a calculated decision. A single chess piece moved into a vulnerable square to bait a reckless king. He wore a simple charcoal suit, well-maintained, but far from expensive. It was the kind of suit a man wore to a job interview for a mid-level management position, or perhaps to his own arraignment. His posture was perfect. Spine straight, hands resting calmly on the polished mahogany surface, one over the other. He observed the room, not with the frantic darting eyes of the accused, but with the patient, analytical gaze of a predator. He catalogued the peeling varnish on the judge's bench, the bored expression of the court stenographer, the way a sliver of morning sun cut through the grimy window, illuminating a universe of dancing dust motes. His calm was a fortress. Inside, his mind was a whirlwind of case law, statutes, and the faces of the victims whose stories had brought him to this specific table in this specific room. He felt the cold, hard knot of righteous fury in his stomach, a feeling he had learned to channel not into heat, but into a glacial, unstoppable focus. Then, the doors to the courtroom swung open with a bang that echoed like a gunshot in the tense silence. Sergeant Frank Miller entered, and the room's atmosphere immediately curdled. He moved not like a public servant, but like an occupying soldier. His uniform was crisply pressed, the brass buttons on his chest gleaming like newly minted coins. His boots struck the floor with an arrogant, percussive rhythm that demanded attention. Miller was a man built of broad, heavy lines, a thick neck, a barrel chest, a jaw that looked like it had been carved from granite. His eyes, small and buried in a fleshy face, swept the room with an expression of profound and weary contempt. He saw only criminals, suspects, and civilians who were simply criminals. Miller's mind, a crude and efficient machine of prejudice, processed the image in milliseconds. Black man, decent suit, but not expensive, sitting alone at the defendant's table as if he owned the place. The sheer lack of fear, the absence of the customary cowering posture he expected, was an affront. It was a challenge. He nudged his partner, Officer Kent, a younger, leaner cop who mirrored Miller's sneer like a pale reflection. "Look at this one," Miller murmured, his voice a low rumble of gravel. "Thinks he's a big shot." He saw the quiet dignity in Elias's posture as insolence. He saw the calm as defiance. To him, a man like Elias in a place like this should be showing one emotion: fear, his fear. He decided to correct this error in the universe's alignment. He and Kent strode toward the defendant's table, their path cutting a wake of anxiety through the few other people scattered in the pews. They stopped directly in front of Elias, their bodies casting long shadows over him. "You're in the wrong seat, boy," Miller said. The word boy was slathered in a thick layer of condescension. Elias didn't look up immediately. He finished his slow, deliberate scan of the room's back wall, then raised his eyes to meet Miller's. His gaze was flat, unreadable, and utterly devoid of the deference Miller demanded. "I believe I'm exactly where I need to be, Sergeant," Elias replied, his voice even and measured. He had noted the name on the officer's brass tag. Miller F. The lack of a tremor in Elias's voice was like gasoline on a flame for Miller. This was not the script. The script was a stammered apology, a frantic scramble to get up, a flood of panicked excuses. You believe wrong, Miller snapped, his voice getting louder, drawing the attention of the bailiff and the stenographer. That table is for defendants with active cases being called. Your name ain't on the docket. So get up and move to the gallery with the rest of the garbage. Elias remained seated. He tilted his head slightly, a gesture of mild curiosity. My business here today is with the court, Sergeant. I've been instructed to wait here. This was a lie, but a necessary one, a piece of bait. Miller's face began to flush a dull, angry red. He leaned forward, planting his meaty hands on the table. His breath was a foul mix of stale coffee and self-importance. Instructed by who, your parole officer? He sneered. I'm giving you one last chance to move before I move you myself. This is a courtroom, not a bus station. We have rules. The irony of Sergeant Frank Miller speaking about rules was so thick Elias could almost taste it. Miller's entire career was a monument to rules broken, lines crossed, and power abused. The file on him, compiled over 6 months of painstaking clandestine investigation, was nearly 400 pages long. It detailed extortion, evidence tampering, perjury, and a pattern of brutalizing minority suspects. Elias Vance knew every sordid chapter of it by heart. I am familiar with the rules, Sergeant, Elias said, his voice retaining its unnerving calm. That was it, the final straw. The calm, the formality, the refusal to break. It was more than Miller's ego could withstand. He saw it as a direct mockery of his authority, his badge, his entire world. All right, you're done, Miller barked, straightening up. You want to be a tough guy. You can be a tough guy in a holding cell. Kent, cuff him. From his vantage point in the third row of the gallery, Elias's chief of staff, Maria Flores, felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. She was a sharp, fiercely loyal woman in her late 40s, dressed in a professional navy pantsuit that made her blend in with the lawyers and clerks. She clutched the handle of her leather briefcase, her knuckles white. She had argued against this part of the plan. Elias, it's too risky. Let me present the filing. Let the FBI handle the arrests. You don't need to put yourself in their hands even for a minute. He had looked at her from across his vast mahogany desk, his expression resolute. They need to do it themselves, Maria. Their hubris needs to be the instrument of their own destruction. It has to be public. It has to be undeniable. And for that to happen, they have to believe I am nothing. They have to underestimate me completely. Now, watching Kent pull out his handcuffs, she saw the terrifying genius of his strategy unfolding. It was one thing to plan it on a whiteboard. It was another to watch it happen to a man she respected more than anyone. Kent moved around the table, yanking Elias's arm with unnecessary force. Elias didn't resist. He stood slowly, his movements fluid. He offered his wrists. This passivity seemed to enrage Miller even more. Resisting arrest, huh? Miller lied, his voice booming for the benefit of anyone listening. Add it to the list. The cold steel of the handcuffs clicked shut around Elias's wrists. They were ratcheted on far too tight, the metal biting painfully into his skin. Elias registered the pain, filed it away, but did not allow it to show on his face. He kept his eyes locked on Miller. Miller smirked, a triumphant, ugly twisting of his lips. He had won. He had restored the natural order. The black man was in cuffs, and he, Frank Miller, had put him there. "What's your name?" Miller demanded, pulling out a notepad with a flourish. Elias Vance. Well, Elias Vance. You're being charged with trespassing in a restricted area and resisting a lawful order. And depending on your attitude from here on out, I might find a few more things to add. He shoved Elias hard in the shoulder, forcing him to stumble back a step. "Now stand there and shut your mouth until the judge comes out to deal with you." Elias simply stood, cuffed and silent. He looked for all intents and purposes like a man who had been thoroughly and publicly defeated. He appeared small, powerless, another anonymous victim of a system designed to crush people like him. This was the moment of maximum humiliation, the moment of apparent defeat. And it was exactly where he needed to be. He subtly shifted his weight, easing the pressure on his wrists. He slowed his breathing, a meditative technique he'd learned long ago to maintain clarity under extreme pressure. He did not feel defeated. He felt like a coiled spring. He felt the cold, thrilling certainty of the impending snap. Miller, puffed up with his petty victory, paced in front of the table like a junkyard dog guarding its territory. He was performing now, playing to the small audience in the room. He wanted everyone to see what happened when you defied him. "See," he said to Kent, loud enough for Elias to hear. "They all think they're special. They all think the rules don't apply to them. A little reminder is all it takes." Inside Miller's head, a monologue of self-congratulation was running on a loop. He was a good cop, a real cop. He kept the streets safe from thugs like this. This guy, with his quiet defiance, was the worst kind. The kind that caused trouble, that filed complaints, that thought they were better than him. He'd teach him a lesson he'd never forget. The judge, Thompson, was an old hardliner. He'd back the police every time. This would be quick. The guy would get a fine, maybe a night in the cells, and Miller would have another story to tell at the bar after his shift. Elias watched him. He saw the chest puffing, the swagger, the sneering confidence. He saw a man so blinded by his own arrogance, he couldn't see the abyss that was opening up right beneath his feet. He had taken the bait. He had taken the rope, fashioned the noose, and was now proudly fitting it around his own neck. Elias glanced at the large institutional clock on the wall. 8:59 a.m. Any second now. He turned his gaze to the heavy oak doors behind the judge's bench. As if on cue, a sharp rap echoed from the other side. The bailiff, a portly man, who had been watching the proceedings with a mixture of apprehension and disinterest, straightened his uniform. "All rise," the bailiff called out, his voice a practiced monotone. The trap was about to be sprung. Judge Thompson entered, a tall, gaunt man in his late 60s, with a mane of silver hair and a perpetually weary expression. He moved with the slow, deliberate pace of a man who had seen every form of human misery and was no longer surprised by any of it. He settled into his high-backed leather chair, his robes rustling around him. He surveyed his courtroom over the top of his reading glasses. His eyes, accustomed to the usual morning docket of petty thefts and misdemeanors, narrowed in confusion as they fell upon the scene at the defendant's table. He saw two of the city's finest, Sergeant Miller and Officer Kent, standing over a well-dressed black man in handcuffs. "Sergeant Miller," the judge said, his voice dry as parchment. "What is the meaning of this? The court is now in session. Why is there a cuffed individual at the defendant's table before the first case has even been called?" Miller's chest swelled with pride. This was his moment. He would show the judge he was proactive, keeping order even before the gavel fell. "Good morning, Your Honor," Miller began, his tone dripping with obsequious respect, a stark contrast to the way he had spoken to Elias. This individual was trespassing in a restricted area of the court. When instructed to move, he became belligerent and refused a lawful order. We were forced to detain him. Judge Thompson peered down at Elias. He saw no sign of belligerence. He saw a man standing with an almost supernatural stillness. "Is this true?" the judge asked, addressing Elias directly. "What is your name, son?" This was the cue. When he spoke, his voice was not loud, but it filled the cavernous room with an astonishing authority. It was a voice of pure, unshakable confidence. "My name, Your Honor, is Elias Vance," he said, his eyes meeting the judge's. "And no, it is not true. I was not belligerent. I did not resist. And I was not trespassing." Miller scoffed loudly. "Your Honor, the man is lying. He's a common—" "Silence, Sergeant," Judge Thompson snapped, cutting him off. The judge's eyes were still fixed on Elias. There was something about this man, a gravitas that didn't fit the picture Miller was painting. "Mr. Vance, you say you have business with the court. What is it?" "My business is with the people of this state, Your Honor," Elias said, his voice as steady as a rock. "And I am here today to file a motion on their behalf." A confused murmur rippled through the courtroom. Miller's confident smirk began to falter, replaced by a flicker of irritation and confusion. This wasn't going according to plan. The man was supposed to be silent and scared. "Are you an attorney?" Judge Thompson asked, leaning forward slightly, his interest piqued. "I am, Your Honor," Elias replied. "Which firm are you with, Counselor?" Elias allowed a beat of silence to hang in the air, a perfectly timed, dramatic pause. He let every eye in the room fix upon him. He saw the dawning horror in Miller's eyes, the first glimmer of a terrible suspicion. Then he delivered the blow. "I am not with a firm, Your Honor," Elias said, his voice dropping slightly, acquiring a hard, lethal edge. "I am with the state. I am the Attorney General for this state." The words hit the room like a physical force. The stenographer's fingers froze over her keys. The bailiff's jaw dropped. Maria Flores allowed herself a small, grim smile. Judge Thompson stared, his mind struggling to process the information. The man in cuffs, the man his most decorated sergeant had just called boy and garbage, was the chief law enforcement officer of the entire state. He felt a cold dread wash over him. But it was Miller's reaction that was the most profound. Every drop of blood drained from Frank Miller's face. He went from a flushed, angry red to a ghastly, pasty white in the space of a single heartbeat. A sheen of cold sweat instantly beaded on his forehead. His confident smirk collapsed into a slack-jawed mask of pure, unadulterated terror. He looked from Elias's calm, accusing eyes to the judge's thunderous expression. His world, so solid and certain just moments before, was liquefying beneath his feet. That's impossible," Miller stammered, his voice a pathetic croak. "He's lying. He's some kind of nutjob, Your Honor." "Is he, Sergeant?" Judge Thompson's voice was now dangerously quiet. He turned his gaze back to Elias. "Mr. Attorney General, forgive my ignorance. You were elected last November, I believe. We have not had the pleasure of meeting." "We have not, Your Honor," Elias confirmed. "I have spent my first 6 months in office conducting a top-to-bottom review of our state's law enforcement agencies, a review that has brought me here to your courtroom today." He then nodded toward the gallery. "My Chief of Staff, Maria Flores, has the relevant documents." On cue, Maria stood and walked gracefully through the bar, her heels clicking with authority on the linoleum. She approached the clerk's station and placed her heavy briefcase on the counter, snapping it open with a sharp click. Miller watched her, his mind screaming. He was trapped. Oh God, he was so utterly, completely trapped. He could feel the cold metal of the cuffs on Elias's wrists as if they were on his own. He had done this. He had arrested the state attorney general. "Your Honor," Elias continued, his voice now ringing with the power he had kept sheathed until this moment, "I am here today to unseal a 28-count indictment against Sergeant Frank Miller, Officer Brian Kent, and 12 other officers of the 15th Precinct." Kent looked like he was about to vomit. "The charges," Elias announced, his voice like the crack of a whip, "include violations of the Racketeer, Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, more commonly known as RICO. They include conspiracy, extortion, evidence tampering, witness intimidation, money laundering, and dozens of counts of aggravated civil rights violations." Judge Thompson stared at the seal of the Attorney General's office on the cover of the top document. His face was a grim mask. He had heard rumors for years about the 15th Precinct, whispers of corruption and brutality, but had always dismissed them as the grumblings of criminals. "For the past 6 months, Your Honor," Elias explained, his gaze now fixed on the crumbling Sergeant Miller, "my office, in conjunction with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, has been conducting a covert investigation into what can only be described as a criminal enterprise operating under the color of law. An enterprise led and enforced by Sergeant Miller himself." Miller started babbling, a torrent of panicked denials. "No, it's a lie! A setup! This thug, this man, he's got a vendetta." "A vendetta, Sergeant?" Elias's voice was soft now, terrifyingly quiet. "Is that what you call the sworn testimony of 47 victims? The financial records detailing over $2 million in extorted funds. The audio recordings of you and your officers planning to plant evidence on unarmed suspects." He took a step forward, the chains between his cuffed hands jingling softly. The sound was like a death knell. "Is that what you call the testimony of Officer Davies from your own precinct, who agreed to wear a wire for us for the last 3 months?" Miller looked as if he had been physically struck. Davies. The rookie, the quiet kid he'd taken under his wing. The betrayal was so profound, it momentarily eclipsed his fear. "Your Honor," Elias said, turning back to the judge, "the evidence is overwhelming, and the events of the last 10 minutes in this very courtroom serve as a final, tragic exhibit of the arrogance and abuse of power that has defined Sergeant Miller's career." He raised his cuffed hands. He saw a black man sitting in a place he believed I didn't belong, and his immediate, unthinking response was to humiliate. He manufactured a reason to arrest me, because my very presence, my refusal to show him the fear he craves, was an offense to his authority. Imagine, Your Honor, imagine what he has done for years to those who did not have my resources. To those who could not fight back, the courtroom was utterly silent, save for the sound of Miller's ragged, panicked breathing. Judge Thompson looked down from his bench, his face carved with fury. He felt a profound sense of shame. This had happened in his courtroom. Under his watch, Sergeant Miller, the judge's voice was a low growl of thunder. "You are a disgrace to your badge, a disgrace to this city, and a disgrace to this court." As if summoned by the judge's condemnation, the main courtroom doors swung open again. 2 men in dark, immaculate suits entered. They were tall, impassive, and radiated an aura of federal authority that made Miller's local cop swagger look like a child's costume. Special agent in charge, Mark Riley, led the way. He walked directly to Elias. "Mr. Attorney General," he said, his voice respectful. He produced a small key and expertly unlocked the handcuffs. Elias rubbed his wrists, the deep red marks a stark testament to his ordeal. He flexed his fingers, the feeling slowly returning. Agent Riley then turned to Miller and Kent. "Frank Miller, you are under arrest for violation of federal law. Brian Kent, you are under arrest." 2 more agents appeared, moving with silent efficiency. They flanked the 2 uniformed cops. One of the agents produced a pair of gleaming silver handcuffs. Miller seemed to shrink inside his uniform. The authority, the arrogance, the power, it all evaporated. leaving behind a terrified, sweating, middle-aged man. "You can't do this," he whispered, his voice cracking. The agent simply took Miller's arm, wrenched it behind his back with practiced ease, and snapped the cuff on. The click echoed through the room, a sound of perfect, karmic justice. Kent was cuffed beside him, his head bowed in shame, tears welling in his eyes. As they were being led past the plaintiff's table, Miller, in a final, desperate act of defiance, spat at Elias. He simply looked the man in the eye, the man who had tried to break him just minutes before. He leaned in close, his voice a whisper that was for Miller alone. "You once told a young man named David Chen, right before you planted drugs in his car, that he was out of his league," Elias said, referencing a specific case from the indictment. "You were right, Sergeant." "He was, but I'm not." He straightened up. "This was never your league to begin with." The FBI agents hauled the two disgraced cops out of the courtroom. The heavy doors swung shut behind them, leaving a stunned silence in their wake. Judge Thompson finally broke the silence. He looked at Elias, who now stood tall and free, the embodiment of the law Miller had so grotesquely perverted. "Mr. Attorney General," the judge said, his voice filled with a newfound and profound respect, "please proceed with your motion." Elias nodded, walked to the prosecutor's podium, and opened his own briefcase. The real work was just beginning. The aftermath? The story exploded across every news channel and front page. AGINCUFFS STATESTOPSOPARIESTEDINHISOWNSTING, screamed one headline. The image of Elias Vance, calm and resolute in handcuffs, became an iconic symbol of the fight against corruption. Frank Miller's fall was as swift as it was total. Denied bail as a flight risk and a danger to the community, he was forced to watch his empire crumble from a jail cell. His trial was a public spectacle. One by one, the victims he had terrorized for years took the stand, their voices finally unshackled by fear. Officer Davies's secret recordings were played for the jury, his chillingly casual discussions of extortion and evidence tampering echoing through the silent courtroom. The jury took less than 2 hours to convict him on all counts. The judge, a federal justice, appointed to the high-profile case, delivered a blistering sentencing statement. He called Miller a cancer on the justice system and sentenced him to the maximum penalty, 30 years in a federal penitentiary with no possibility of parole. His ruin was not merely professional. His wife filed for divorce before the verdict was even read, citing the public humiliation and the discovery of his secret bank accounts filled with illicit cash. His 2 sons stopped visiting him in prison. His loyal officers, including Kent, had all taken plea deals, turning state's evidence against him in exchange for lighter sentences. He lost his pension, his home was seized to pay restitution to his victims, and his name became a byword for police corruption in the city's police academy. He was no longer Sergeant Miller. He was inmate number 73,406, a disgraced felon in a sea of men he had once put away. The ultimate irony was not lost on him. The systemic changes were just as profound. The 15th Precinct was disbanded, and its operations taken over by a federal oversight committee co-chaired by Attorney General Vance. A new, rigorous training program focusing on de-escalation, civil rights, and implicit bias was implemented citywide. Hundreds of cases handled by Miller and his crew were reopened, leading to over 24 wrongful convictions being overturned. The city paid out millions in settlements, a costly but necessary penance. Months later, Elias Vance stood in his corner office on the 40th floor of the state capitol building. The city sprawled out beneath him, a vast, glittering tapestry of lights. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and purple. He was on the phone with Maria Flores, who was now heading the new civil rights division he had created. "The last of the convictions was overturned this morning," she said, her voice filled with a quiet satisfaction. "David Chen is a free man. He's going to law school." A rare, genuine smile touched Elias's lips. "Good. That's good news, Maria. You know," she said, "I was thinking about that day in the courtroom. I was terrified for you, Elias." "I know," he said softly, "but it was necessary. Men like Miller don't respect laws or policies written on paper. They only respect power. We had to show them that the power of the law, when wielded correctly, is greater than the power of their badge." He looked out the window at the endless stream of headlights flowing through the city's arteries. "The badge is supposed to be a symbol of trust, Maria," he said, his voice a low, thoughtful murmur. "Not a crown. We just reminded them of that you did, Mr. Attorney General, that you did." He ended the call and stood there for a long moment, watching the city transition from day to night. The fight was far from over. Corruption was a weed. You could pull it up in one place, but it would always try to grow back in another. His desk was piled high with files, each one representing another injustice, another fight to be fought. He turned from the window, rolled up his sleeves, and got back to work. What an incredible story! Elias Vance proved that the system can be made to work for the people, but only if there are people with enough courage and integrity to wield it. Sergeant Miller thought he was untouchable, a king in his own little kingdom, but karma, in the form of a quiet, unassuming man in a simple suit, came for him in the most public and humiliating way possible. He learned the hard way that true authority doesn't come from a badge and a gun, but from the respect you earn and the justice you serve. If you loved watching this powerful story of justice being served, please smash that like button right now. It really helps the channel grow and allows us to bring you more stories like this one. Share this video with anyone who loves a satisfying story of karma, where an arrogant bully gets exactly what they deserve. We all know someone who would cheer at that ending. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on our daily drama and revenge stories. We have new content coming your way every single day, and you won't want to miss a single moment. Let me know in the comments below, what would you have done if you were in Elias Vance's shoes? Would you have had the nerve to go through with such a risky plan? I can't wait to read your thoughts.